Hello and welcome. My name is John Glasgow. This is Randy Parada, my best friend, like forever, and creative partner.
Hi there.
This is a documentary about our animated film titled The Way to Get Money is to Ask for It.
Yeah, we started conceptualizing the film back in 1970. We had just finished making a film using all kinds of experimental techniques. In fact, that's what we called it, experimental techniques. And it had some live action, but it also had a lot of stop action. And that's a technique where you take one frame at a time. So you take a frame, move an object, take another frame, move an object. And so it's a very tedious process, but that's basically, it's basically a type of animation. That's how animation is done. And then once we learned how to do it well, we decided to make a more extended film using these characters that you see here. And so it was an early form of claymation, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Now, the equipment we were using at the time was an Elmo brand regular 8mm movie camera.
Yeah.
It had absolutely no sound capabilities, unlike the fairly new then Super 8 format, but it could take one frame at a time, which enabled us to do stop motion.
Mm. Yeah. And originally it was going to be a Christmas story about the characters that you see here. And the idea of the film is that they needed to get money for Christmas. And in fact, there was even going to be a scene where they're dressed up as Santa and they're standing on the street ringing bells, you know, like the Salvation Army. But eventually we realized, or I guess you realized, the film really had nothing to do with Christmas.
Right.
So we decided to drop the Christmas idea, but the bell ringing scene remained in the film. They weren't dressed as Santa, but it was just the two of them ringing bells for charity.
Right. Now the figures themselves were made out of plastic modeling clay, which you could buy in pretty much any toy store.
Yeah.
And they were very artfully crafted by my talented friend, Randy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We were using incandescent lighting at the time, which generated a fair amount of heat. And the problem with that was that the clay figures started getting soft and deforming, almost like they were melting.
Yeah, they were dripping down.
Right. And this then compelled us to put them in a refrigerator or even a freezer to keep them the right shape for shooting between scenes.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to introduce the characters quickly, over here, as you see on the left side of your screen, is Fritz, and he was just kind of a cool English guy. He was inspired by our interest in British rock at the time. Not that Fritz was a rock musician or anything, but you know, it was just this guy with a British accent and voiced by John sitting over there.
Right, good shot.
Right. And then on the far right of the screen, that little guy is Fritz's sidekick. That's Bubba, who, well, he's not the brightest character in the world. In fact, he was based on a real person that John knew in high school.
Right.
We're not going to mention his name, are we?
No.
No. Okay. And yeah, this kid wasn't too bright, and he had kind of a funny way of talking through his nose, and so that inspired Bubba's voice, which is, he doesn't really say anything. All he says is, he. And in order to sound like him, you have to kind of look like him. So before we knew what he looked like, I figured, well, you know, before I sculpted him, I figured I'd better make some sketch drawings. So after the first sketch, I just looked at him and thought, yeah, that's it. Got him after one try.
Exactly.
And we got a third guy.
Yeah, the third guy. The fellow you see standing in the middle is the fairy godfather. Mm-hmm. And he was actually patterned after a stout, sort of jolly character type,
Mm-hmm.
well illustrated by the actor Ed Wynn.
Mm-hmm.
Now we also included several famous people in the movie, those that we could impersonate decently.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the Beatles are in there, and particularly George Harrison, because Randy was able to impersonate his voice acceptably, and also W.C. Fields, because Randy's brother, Craig, could do his voice decently as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in animation, the soundtrack has to be recorded in its entirety first before the filming. So we recorded the soundtrack at my house, or my parents' house actually, in my bedroom, just using an old-fashioned Sony reel-to-reel recorder. And the additional sound effects were done on John's cassette recorder. There was a couple scenes where the characters are out in the street, so we went out in the street with a recorder and got sounds of traffic moving, and we went into my bank and got some sounds of office machines. And the car sounds were from the actual car that I owned at the time. I had a Triumph TR3, 1959 TR3 Roadster, little sports car.
Great car, great sounds. Mm-hmm. We also had electronic sounds, and those were obtained from a sound effects record which belonged to Craig, Randy's brother. At the time, Craig was living in Pomona, which was a good hour's drive from where we lived. Mm-hmm. But being determined as we were, we decided to drive all the way out there and back to get that record.
Mm-hmm. And the theme song was a song that I had written. John and I performed it and recorded it. And we had a little help from a third person, a keyboard player by the name of Patrick Schmidt. And he also provided some music throughout the film as well. So Patrick, if you're watching, get in touch with me, okay? We'll show you the film.
Indeed. Now, the filming itself was done in my bedroom, my parents' house in Encino, and it took 3 months to complete, and over 19,000 frames taken one at a time. Mm-hmm. The sets we had were fairly complex and were homemade, except for one which was a modified Barbie doll house, which served as the living room scene that you see in the beginning and the end of the film. Mm-hmm. The lights, some of which were professional, were borrowed. And one funny story about the whole process was that one of the scenes required a lemon tree. And this we fashioned from a branch that I had obtained from one of the many citrus trees we had out in the backyard. And but one night when I was laying there, I heard this sort of scratching sound coming from the direction of the sets. I thought, what in the world is that? And so when I woke up the next morning, I went over and checked it out, and below the lemon tree there was a couple of pretty good sized piles of sawdust-like material and little tiny holes in the trunk of the lemon tree from which the sawdust was emanating. And so what it was termites.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you called me that morning.
Right.
He gets me on the phone. He says, "Hey, listen, you better come over right away. We got to finish this scene up and get this tree out of here."
Indeed, because my mother found out about it and was not happy at all and wanted that tree out of the house immediately, if not sooner.
Yeah. So the one problem we had is that the soundtrack and the film were on two separate devices, and we had to try to run them together, try to synchronize them. And the sound kept falling behind, and so what I had to do was kind of disassemble my tape recorder, wrap some masking tape around the spindle, and kind of speed it up a bit. And so from that, it was we could present it to people. I had to kind of pause it every once in a while, but it was presentable, and we could finally show the film to other people using two separate devices.
As a matter of fact, the film was premiered to the public in 1971 at UCSB through a small film festival that some of the students had gotten together, and I think they called it First Films Funky.
Yeah.
And it was pretty well received, and we got some good applause and some laughter, and we were quite gratified by it, actually. And then 20 years later, we decided we wanted to refurbish the soundtrack because there were things about it we just didn't really care for that we thought really weren't that great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we kept most of it, but there were like little bits and pieces that we thought, no, we got to replace this. And the problem was just how we were going to do it. And luckily, a friend of mine is also a professional recording engineer. So what he did was loan us a piece of professional recording equipment. And from that, we were able to refurbish the soundtrack. And so a special thanks out there to Steve Powell, if you're watching. And so this was 1991. And at that time, video was becoming a big thing. And so we thought, well, we should put this on video. And so we just videoed the whole movie right off of a screen and then combined the soundtrack. And finally, we had it together in one package.
Yep. And then, so we had a re-premiere in that same year, 1991, at Randy's apartment for a few friends. And I think they appreciated the changes and the synchronization.
Yeah, they did. Although there was one complaint, and that was the flickering. Because whenever you try to video something off a screen, you get a flickering. So then in 2015, we took the original film and had it digitized.
Mm-hmm. And then a couple of years later, we added a bit more dialogue and shortened the credits. And then finally put the whole thing on a DVD. And it was finally considered done.
Yeah.
Gee, it only took, technically, 46 years.
Yeah, 46 years before we were satisfied.
Yeah. So it is viewable, available on YouTube. And at the end of this documentary, there will be a link that you can get to the film. And hopefully you'll look at it and like it. And thank you very much.
Thank you.